really big balance patch today, but the main thing I want to look at is ALots. I'm not going to talk about the PvP part too much, which is what he's getting reworked into, a much better PvP unit. I think it's going to be good, but if you want more on that, you should watch a Legend RTA player like Light or Elf Mage or somebody else. For PvE though, S2 is going from 2-turn cooldown to 4-turn cooldown, but gaining exploding weak points. This is a net loss because this 2-turn cooldown meant you could use Spirit's Breath with ALots, and then you could just use S2 every single turn. Exploding weak points, currently only Riza Hawkeye has this, and it's a 20% damage increase, which gets removed when you use an attack. So this is nice, but not worth the loss of the infinite S2. And its S3 is getting changed from Silence to Death Break, which could be useful, but 80%, and with S2 getting nerfed, probably not going to be worth it. And then they said it's because the combination of his S2 with Spirit's Breath made it a little bit too good in certain content and hard to control, meaning that they found it a bit difficult to design content while having to always account for the fact that ALots could just permanently S2 somebody. So they nerfed them in PvE and buffed them in PvP instead, and there is a recall available for ALots, and I'll be going over where ALots is currently used in PvE and how this will affect the ability to clear those PvE contents, and also that with ALots getting nerfed and Spirit's Breath main usage getting removed, there is no recall for Spirit's Breath. We can see here though that Rihanna and Lucilla is also getting a recall in the same patch, and the way that artifact recalls work is you don't get a select there. Instead, you get the artifacts back based on limit break, and also any bottles that you use, I think also come back just as the artifact. So most importantly with the ALots nerfs, we should look at where is he used, because people do talk a lot about plus 30 Spirit's Breath ALots for PvE, but how important is it really? I have this plus 21 Spirit's Breath because I keep my spare on him, since we were using Spirit's Breath for Hall of Trials, so this is on Lulika right now, so I have a plus 30 and a plus 21 Spirit's Breath. And where do I use ALots? It's not here right now, but Ice Expedition, because I set up an Ice Expedition team, and I never bothered to change it. How important is ALots for Ice Expedition? Not really, because this little unit exists now. She is very, very good for Ice Expedition. And there's Lilka, Helga, Sid, Rawana team, or Lilka, Ram, Tamarin, Brieg for Ice Expedition, both of which are much easier to do than having a plus 30 Spirit's Breath for your ALots. And they both score higher too. I'm only running the ALots team because it's worse, and I'm already in the process of building Loka even before these nerfs were announced, so it's kind of whatever for me, for Ice Expedition at least. So I wouldn't say that Ice Expedition is really valuable content for ALots to be in, especially to the point where you should invest in a Spirit's Breath for him. The main place that people like to talk about using ALots in is for Abyss. We can just come to this Abyss thing, Control F ALots, and we can look at all of the places where ALots was used, for the floors at least. So Trunkran, ALots lots, Fury Enjoyer is where most of these pop-ups are going to be at. Floor 101, yes, ALots has a team, but there's other options. You just can just Curus it, which is what I used on my ult when I did this again. Here you can ALots, but you can also just Curus it with Stene. There's also the Shuri, Stene, Wanda team, and 102's gotten even more options these days, just haven't seen that many videos for it. 104, ALots lots Shuri, but you can just do it with TG already. And then there is also for 105, this team, which with the buffs that some of these units have gotten, it's cycled back to being almost good again, like all usable units. Made is pretty bad, but you can use Destina or Ruel after her buff would be nice. Before 105 is something we maybe have to take a look at. 106, not a huge deal because this is all 3 stars. 108, you can just TG it. 109, I don't have a video here for some reason, but I know that TG, Kitty, Akades, and Rowana works for this floor because that's what I did when I did this. So that the floor 109s was not an issue. 101, 112, 113, all 3 of these you can just TG them. Shuri, ALots is just a secondary option. 114, this is supposed to be an all Earth units floor, so but I guess you can just ALots Shuri it. But this floor is not that hard, you just kind of just need a few Earth units and you're good to go. Like these are all pretty easy to get units, at least, that you should have already. Destina, Rowana, Saria, Bologna. And then there is 119, where this floor was... It was Tamarin. Tamarin, Diane, or Amelia was what I remember using. So there's definitely other options for this floor. I just need to look into it a bit more because Diane and Amelia are both limited units. But ALots definitely not mandatory for floor 119. So from the normal Abyss floors, it's really just 105, which has other options, but this was probably the most accessible of them in terms of building units that aren't necessarily bad. But after buffs, Ravi is once again worth building, so not a huge deal here. And now we can look at the challenge ones. Floor 1, ALots is an option, but you can just do this. Floor 5, those are our options. Floor 6, 7, 8, there's other options. Floor 9, there's other options. And then floor 10, I only see ALots comps here. So I have to go look again for teams that don't have ALots. But also one thing about Challenge Abyss is that you can just do the trial and the restriction separately. Like you can just clear it with a 5-star hero. And then clear it again later without a 5-star hero while ignoring the trial. So these teams are all set up to clear both of these at the same time, which doesn't necessarily have to be how you approach these. And floor 14 is another ALots only, but the same thing applies where you could probably do it in 2 separate runs, or there might be other teams that I just haven't looked at yet. Floor 13 and 15, 17, and 20 all have other options, with 19 also being the thing where you could just do this in 2 separate runs, and you could have or there might just be other teams that exist that I haven't looked at yet. So Floor Abyss, while ALots is super good, I wouldn't say he's mandatory because pretty much every floor either has more options or just hasn't really been looked at that much yet. There is actually some light usage for ALots in Nightmare Raid as well, with the ALots Lots Shuri cheese on Nightmare Queen and also Nightmare Vera. For Queen, I don't think it's a huge deal. You get Tamarin for free now, so just use Tamarin and you'll be fine for this fight. Tamarin, Asaria, Commander Lorena, or Spectre Tenebria, AOL, ROL is what I recommend using. And those are all pretty much free or easy to get units, so it's not really a huge deal there. And then for Vera, there are other teams for Vera. This one isn't really a realistic team, there's only if you were here for Fire Rift. This team, Hazel, Mercedes, Sirmia, is pretty much the main core, I think, for free-to-play Fire Rift. And you can put in Lilius if you have her, or you can use Adventurer Ross. Zella Carmine Rose also over Sirmia, works fine. Just still another easy-to-get unit since she's a 3-star. And Acades also works over Hazel, though Hazel's way better. So there's some pretty easy free-to-play options, or not too hard to get options for clearing Nightmare Vera. So I don't think the loss of ALots is really a big deal here either. So if ALots doesn't really matter for Ice Expedition, very good, but not mandatory for Abyss, and it doesn't really matter for Nightmare Raid, why is he even getting nerfed? My guess it's for Hall of Trials. Here we can see this row is the first rotation for Abyssal Euphine, second row is the second rotation, and this row is the third rotation, and ALots is present in the second and first rotations. With the power of hindsight, I don't actually think ALots was best in slot for the first rotation. We didn't know Ice Adden existed until the last 2 days of the second rotation, and Ice Adden definitely would have been better than ALots for this first rotation. The second rotation had a element restriction where you couldn't use 2 units of the same element. So you couldn't use Iceflawn here, where I think Iceflawn was better than ALots. But there's a chance that Crescent Moon Rin would have been better than ALots. A little bit hard to say because you're trading a more consistent crit damage buff and Warhorn in exchange for more Guider Aether turns, but it would have been close. Either way, I don't think ALots was really mandatory for either of these for hitting the top 10. So, with that in mind, ALots wasn't even necessarily the best in slot for at least 5, maybe 6 of the current Hall of Trials rotations, because we can look here, Elena, Elena, there's no ALots in these Elena teams. So if he's not even necessarily best in slot for Hall of Trials, we can say, without looking at hindsight, he was best in slot for 2 out of 6 rotations. That's not that much. So what is he getting nerfed for? I think it's just the existence of this unit, where with a plus 30 Spirit's Breath, he can infinitely push up units. Just every single turn, 100% CR push, attack buff. And we can take a look at it here, the stuff that goes on during the break phase. Go a little bit further ahead to like about here probably. And during this Abyssal Euphine boss had Abyssal Euphine's actual passive, where she reduces CR pushes by 50%, and ALots was still the best in slot before Ice Addon came out. So you can see here, ALots is just pushing, and just doing it every single turn. The thing about Hall of Trials is the boss, when you hit them, their counter goes up even with extra attacks, dual attacks. It would count as 2 hits. So instead of the old Hall of Trials meta of dual attack spamming, you were just non-attack skill spamming instead, pretty much. That's why the current Hall of Trials rotation with Astromancer Elena, where they changed the mechanics so that extra turns already give your DPS greater attack buff and a CR push. So basically turns everybody into a better ALots. They pretty much removed the need for ALots, but I guess they just don't want to have to balance around the fact that every single time you make Hall of Trials content, you're going to have to account for this little mage that can do these things with the maximum break Spirit's Breath. And is that good for the game? I think it's kind of good to remove it, honestly, because with what we knew at the time, for the first 2 rotations of this new Hall of Trials, ALots was mandatory to get top 100, and having your top 100 be locked to having a plus 30 5-star artifact was kind of annoying, and you didn't need it plus 30, but if you didn't have a plus 30, you were spending a lot more time resetting, especially this one where your extra turns mattered a lot more. With Ice Addon, it didn't matter as much because you just needed Guider Aether to have crit damage buff when he used S1. For this one, if your Spirit's Breath didn't proc, you were resetting. So I think just having this whole mechanic be gone is nice for people who want to push top 100, which is already kind of endgame content. There's not that many people who can hit top 100, but I also don't think that many people even try right now. But just having top 100 be a lot healthier is a good change. And I guess if they ever want to make future Abyss content, that's also a thing. Like not having to play around the fact that, well, if we make this boss like this, then ALots is going to come in here and do his little thing and this boss is trivialized, but only if you have a plus 30 Spirit's Breath is something that they're probably factoring in as well. And also we can take a look at the history of unit nerfs that had best in slot artifacts, I guess. So most recent unit nerf was Hua on September 30th, 2022. I think it's exactly 2 years ago. It's kind of funny. And here, Hua got obliterated. She was useless for a bit. And then here... Yep, no recalls for Uberius Tooth, and people bought Uberius Tooth from shop. People used bottles on it because it's not available in any banners, so it was pretty annoying to get. So no Uberius Tooth recall in this Hua nerf. And we can go deep in the archives back to June 26, 2019, over 5 years ago. And what happened here was they nerfed Windrider. So what happened with Windrider is an issue that caused the Winder Rider to provide an attack increase the turn an enemy was killed instead of providing the increase the following turn has been fixed. And this wasn't really a bug fix, they were just nerfing it because at this time, it was young E7, there weren't that many units, and ALots Says was a little bit broken because Says has an AoE extra damage proc after the enemy is killed, and Windrider would give the full attack bonus before that damage proc went off. And this was before Windrider got buffed, where they shifted some of the attack boost to be permanently active. So Says would kill somebody, get 60% extra attack, and then AoE damage proc, and that was killing pretty much everything in the game. And this was before RTA came out too, so it was just Arena and Guild War, and there wasn't really any counterplay. So that's why Windrider got recalled. However, Says did eventually get a recall after the Wind Rider nerf, but it took a full month. This is 4 weeks after that Wind Rider nerf. So after a full month of people riding, pretty much, they did offer a Says recall eventually. And this is just normal recall details. Back then we didn't get selectors, we just got the unit back. And it's hard to compare this to the Hua Young and the ALots thing because this is the artifact nerf that affected the hero. And honestly, this was 5 years ago. It was a completely different game when building heroes was really, really hard. And molas costed more and everything. It was bad times back then. And the logic is kind of the same though, because when you nerf Wind Rider, you directly nerf Says because it was his best slot artifact and the only way he was really usable, or I guess good. And now when you nerf ALots, you nerf the best user of Spirit's Breath, and when you nerf Hua Young, you also nerf the best user of Uberius Tooth. So you're kind of nerfing the artifact while nerfing the hero, and here you nerf the hero while nerfing the artifact. It's consistent between the Hua Young and the ALots thing, but the Says thing from a while ago is a bit different. And you can say, yes, that Spirit's Breath and Uberius 2 still do function fine, like the artifacts didn't get touched, but Says didn't really get touched either. It was Wind Rider that got nerfed, and yeah, it was just, Says was technically unchanged. The Wind Rider nerfed him a ton, but the usage of Says decreased about as much as the usage of Uberius Tooth after the Hua Young nerfs. It's a bit hard to say, but aside from the history of hero and artifact nerfs, we should also take a look at how usable Spirit's Breath will be after ALots is gone. So one thing with ALots getting nerfed is that he was the main user of Spirit's Breath, so we need to look at who else can use Spirit's Breath. I personally never recommended using bottles or selectors on Spirit's Breath. For my tier list, I had it in the really good for PvE, but please don't use selectors on this tier, which I do need to move it out of there now because it's not really needed at all. There's not too many users for Spirit's Breath, honestly. Like, the only person who really uses it is AOL, and it's not even like her best or second best option. I think POV is way better. People just like using Spirit's Breath, but this data is also, it's Champ Plus, and maybe because of server load, whoever runs this website changed it before you could filter by Champion, Emperor, and Legend. Now it's just Champion Plus. But Spirit's Breath, not a great win rate, but compared to Spirit's Breath or Etika Scepter, Spirit's Breath is still higher. We can also look at the season before the previous one, where it's the same thing. Spirit's Breath more used and higher win rate, but POV is still the second best one. So Spirit's Breath, not really much of a priority on AOL. It does allow for some usage, I guess, like in Nightmare Raid Queen. If you're using AOL, Spirit's Breath helps make it a little bit better there because you can spam S3 a bit more. And then the other PvE usage is during the most recent Hall of Trials. I get the current one, the previous rotation, and the one before that, all 3 Eleanor rotations. The best artifact for Luluka was Spirit's Breath because it would let you get an extra hit in during the break phase. But was this necessary to even hit top 100? No, it never was. It's an extra 2 to 3 million damage, and most of the people in the top 100 never even bothered to do this. I don't even think the entire top 10 was using Spirit's Breath. It was only really mandatory for the top 3. We've gone over all of ALots' usage for PvE. Ice Expedition and Nightmare Raid, doesn't really matter that we can't use them anymore. Abyss kind of sucks that we can't use them, but with the way Epic 7 is now, you can definitely clear all of Abyss before you get a plus 30 Spirit's Breath, or even one copy, really. And even though he was really, really good, he wasn't mandatory. So it's not unmanageable for us to clear Abyss without him. And there's Hall of Trials, where 2 of the 6 rotations so far, he's been good. But I'd say it's probably healthier for the game overall for him to not be, or not even him, for the Spirit's Breath, either plus 30 or lower with a lot of resets involved, to be the thing that's gating people from top 100. So ALots, loss in PvE of ALots, not a huge deal. The big deal is Spirit's Breath, I would say, right? Because people, even though I've personally always said it wasn't really a good idea to use powder bottles or selectors on Spirit's Breath, have already done so, and there's no real way to take that back. The same thing happened before with Hua Young, where people bottled, they bought Uberius Tooth, and plus 30 Uberius Tooth while in the gutter, even after she got buffed again, Uberius isn't really usable on her. So, even though it's consistent with how they've done unit nerfs that had best in slot artifacts that weren't used on anybody else, doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It is kind of annoying. We did say, though, that looking at the Rihanna and Lucilla buffs, or nerfs, this patch, they don't give selectors. It would just be a recall, so you would just be getting your EXP back, but I would like my EXP back on my second Spirit's Breath. They did give a selector for Sez when Windrider got nerfed, but that was 5 years ago. Kind of a completely different game at that point. It was so much harder to build heroes back then. Whereas now I feel like Artifact EXP is important. But yes, it's not that hard to get. But yes, the important thing is mainly the bottles and the powder that was spent. I don't think ALots is... Or I don't think Smallgate's budging on this ALots nerf, to be honest, because... One, it is probably better for the game, in my opinion, to have ALots not be tied to a plus 30 Spirit's Breath for clearing some PvE content in the future. Just removing that possibility is fine. And also just, they tried nerfing ALots before. This is the second time they've tried to adjust ALots and make him not work in PvE. And they pretty much had to, like, give him much better PvP buffs than he got last time in order to try and force this through. So since this is the second time, I don't think they're budging. In the end, this was mainly just to go over where ALots is currently used in PvE and how big the losses would be, which, regardless of the Spirit's Breath issue, I don't think losing ALots for PvE is really a huge deal.